You know those creepy videos of people taping their windows before a hurricane? That's a World War II civilian defense tactic. So are blackout curtains, community watch systems, and backyard vegetable gardens. September 1st, 1939. Britain imposed a total blackout before declaring war. Every window in the country had to be covered. No streetlights, no car headlights. Complete darkness, enforced by your neighbors, who could have you fined or arrested for leaving a crack of light visible. Within a year, German bombers would kill 43,000 British civilians in 8 months. 1 in 6 Londoners would lose their homes. Cities became battlefields, and ordinary people had to learn how to fight a war from their living rooms. The tactics they developed still work. Blackout protocols for concealment, improvised shelters you can build in your home, neighborhood defense networks, food production systems that fed entire nations. Most of these techniques have been completely forgotten. We're going to recover them. April 26, 1937. German bombers attacked Guernica, a town of 7,000 in northern Spain. For the first time in history, aerial bombardment completely destroyed an entire town. The Germans left the munitions factory untouched. They aimed for the town center, the plaza filled with refugees. This was a test run. 3 years later, the Blitz began. From September 1940 to May 1941, German aircraft dropped bombs on London for 57 consecutive nights. Nearly 7,000 civilians died in September alone. The death toll for the entire 8-month campaign reached 43,000, almost half of Britain's total civilian war deaths. During World War I, German Zeppelin raids killed 256 people in Paris over 18 days. The entire Zeppelin campaign against Britain involved 126 flights total. World War II brought tens of thousands of bombs in a single night. Britain faced sustained attack. America prepared for attacks that mostly never came. President Roosevelt established the Office of Civilian Defense in May 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor. By 1942, 8,459 local civilian defense councils coordinated 5.4 million volunteers. British civilians used Anderson shelters every night, despite the cold and damp, because bombers were overhead. Americans drilled and stockpiled because the threat felt real enough to act on, even without immediate danger. World War II proved that early preparation, even when it feels excessive, creates infrastructure you can't build once the crisis starts. The British government imposed blackout regulations on September 1, 1939, 2 days before declaring war. Every window and door had to be covered at night with heavy curtains, cardboard, or paint. Not a glimmer of light could escape. Air raid precautions wardens patrolled neighborhoods, knocking on doors, imposing legal penalties on violators. German bomber pilots navigated by spotting city lights from the air, extinguish the lights, and the city disappears. Black cotton fabric became standard. Sometimes families needed 2 or 3 layers before all light was blocked. Americans had blackouts by 11 p.m., streetlights extinguished, hoods covering traffic lights. Car headlights were covered or replaced with War Department-approved lamps that produced 1/6 the light of a full moon. Fort Stevens, Oregon, June 21, 1942. A Japanese submarine surfaced and opened fire. The Americans instituted a complete blackout. With no visible target, the submarine fired blindly for 15 minutes, then gave up. Measurable proof of concept. But the costs were real. Traffic fatalities nearly doubled. Pedestrians tripped over curbs, crashed into each other, wandered into traffic. Crime increased under cover of darkness. Modern application, light discipline during power grid failures. If the grid goes down and you're running a generator, uncontrolled light makes your house the only visible target for miles. During civil unrest, avoiding attention means controlling every visible signal, light being the most obvious. The British eventually relaxed restrictions. In September 1944, they shifted to dim-out, lighting equivalent to moonlight. On April 30, 1945, the day Hitler died, they lit Big Ben for the first time in 5 years and 123 days. Bomb blasts shatter windows, flying glass kills and maims. The British solution was gummed brown paper, 3 inches wide, applied corner to corner in a diagonal crisscross pattern on the inside of every window. The government distributed rolls free. You wetted it to activate the adhesive, then stuck it to the glass. The pattern distributed stress across the pane. When the blast wave hit, the tape held the shards together, still broken, but not flying through the room at lethal velocity. This was voluntary. Some families refused. They found taped windows too depressing, a constant visual reminder of the threat. The calculation: how much of normal life do you sacrifice for uncertain protection? The effectiveness was never quantified. No study measured injury reduction. The technique might have worked through physics or psychology, giving families a sense of control against an overwhelming threat. Modern parallel: hurricane-resistant window film uses the same principle. Laminate the glass to keep it from shattering into projectiles. Contemporary versions use polymer films instead of gummed paper, but the mechanism is identical. Some historians suggest the tape's real value was ritual. Every family in Britain participated in the same nightly routine: blackout curtains, taped windows, checking the shelter. The shared action created social cohesion. That cohesion might have saved more lives than the tape itself. Anderson shelters: outdoor, half-buried, corrugated steel. Morrison shelters: indoor, cage-like, doubling as furniture. Both saved lives. Both reflected different assumptions about how you die in an air raid. The Anderson shelter was designed in 1938. Made from corrugated steel sheets, the shelter measured 6.5 feet by 4.5 feet, space for 4 to 6 people. The government distributed 1.5 million before war began. By the end, 3.6 million had been produced. Installation required digging a pit 4 feet deep in your garden, assembling the steel sections, then covering the structure with at least 2 feet of earth. Free for families earning less than £5 per week, purchased by wealthier households. The shelters were miserable, cold, damp, prone to flooding. During the Blitz, families used them every night despite the discomfort. Wet and cold beats buried under rubble. Morrison shelters arrived in 1941. They were designed for people without gardens, urban apartment dwellers, row house residents. The structure was a steel cage, 6.5 feet long, 4 feet wide, 2.5 feet high. It doubled as a dining table during the day. The kit contained 359 parts and 3 tools. 2 average people could assemble it in 1 or 2 hours. The government tested the design by demolishing a bomb-damaged house on top of a shelter containing a mannequin. The mannequin survived. The survival data is remarkable. Researchers examined 44 severely damaged houses where occupants had used Morrison shelters. Of 136 people, 120 escaped without serious injury, an 88% survival rate. The 3 deaths occurred in a house that took a direct hit, and the shelter had been placed incorrectly. Anderson assumed you'd escape to an exterior shelter. Morrison assumed the house would collapse around you. Both were correct in different scenarios. Modern application: the Morrison shelter's logic, create a hardened space inside your home that can withstand structural collapse, applies directly to tornado safe rooms and earthquake-resistant interior zones. The dual-use concept works too. Furniture that serves a normal function while providing emergency protection maximizes limited space. Incendiary bombs were small, 1 to 6 pounds each. Bombers dropped them by tens of thousands. By the end of the war, a single B-29 could carry 1,520 napalm bombs. The bombs didn't explode. They burned. Civilians had to learn how to fight them. Every household was expected to maintain firefighting equipment: 50 feet of garden hose, 100 pounds of sand in 4 containers, 3 3-gallon buckets, shovel, axe, ladder, gloves, dark glasses. The technique: use a wooden scoop to transfer the burning bomb into a sand bucket, or smother it with a sand mat, a sugar bag half filled with dry sand. Never use water on certain types, it could make the fire worse. British observers studied German civil defense. The Germans trained 800,000 house wardens to extinguish fires, clear attics of flammable materials, and repaint homes with fireproofing compounds. The British adopted the model. Individual households couldn't maintain 24-hour fire watch. Communities organized rotations, neighbors alternating shifts, coordinated response when fires started. When incendiaries fell, the warden activated the network and the entire block responded. Modern parallel: coordinated wildfire defense in high-risk zones. Neighborhoods in California, Australia, and the Mediterranean organized similar systems, clearing brush, maintaining fire breaks, training residents in suppression techniques. 1 household with sand buckets is helpless against a firestorm. 50 households with coordinated response can save the block. By 1943, 6 million Americans volunteered in public protection roles. Britain had similar scale. The Corps was the air raid warden, 1 for every 500 people. Wardens knew every resident in their sector, how many people lived in each house, who was deaf, invalid, elderly, who would need help evacuating. Equipment was minimal: steel helmet, arm patch, whistle, flashlight, eye shade, first aid kit, notebook. Powers were extensive: enforce blackout, render first aid, fight fires, arrest suspected saboteurs. During the day, wardens visited homes, educated residents about blackout procedures and firefighting techniques. At night, they patrolled, ensured compliance, responded to incidents. Above the wardens sat block leaders, civilians who transmitted information from local defense councils to households and reported conditions back up the chain. Government directives flowed down, ground-level feedback flowed up. This architecture scaled to entire nations. In the United States, 8,459 local civilian defense councils coordinated millions of volunteers by 1942. Modern application: Community Emergency Response Teams, or CERT, Neighborhood Emergency Coordinators, Block Captain Networks for Disaster Response. Centralized command can't know local conditions fast enough to respond effectively. You need distributed intelligence, people who know their neighbors, their vulnerabilities, their resources. The 500-to-1 ratio appears in modern emergency management recommendations. One trained coordinator per 500 residents provides coverage without overwhelming bureaucracy. The number came from trial under actual wartime conditions. By 1945, 20 million victory gardens operated across the United States. Half of all American households participated. They produced 8 million tons of food, 40% of the nation's vegetables. The USDA printed planning guides. The Office of Civilian Defense organized training. Communities held competitions. Schools taught children to grow food. People planted anywhere: backyards, window boxes, vacant lots, schoolyards. Many planted on top of Anderson shelters. The gardens created food security despite disrupted supply chains. Rationing made the gardens essential. In 1943, buying 1 pound of bacon required 7 ration points plus 30 cents. Victory gardens bypassed the ration system for fresh produce. Families grew vegetables, canned them for winter, stretched their ration points further. The British experience was even more intense. Germany's U-boat campaign aimed to starve Britain into surrender. Domestic food production became existential. Gardens expanded into parks, golf courses, railway edges. Modern application: supply chain resilience through home production. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered a revival. Seed companies sold out, millions of new gardeners. When supply chains fail or seem fragile, people reclaim direct control over food production. Community gardens function as infrastructure. They provide backup food sources, teach skills, create neighborhood cohesion. 40% of vegetables from distributed home production is achievable when people have guidance and motivation. Not everything worked. Some measures were theater, some had unintended costs, but some techniques produced measurable results. Morrison shelters, 88% survival rate in houses that collapsed. Fort Stevens blackout, the submarine fired blind, gave up. Window tape effectiveness, unquantified. Blackout trade-offs, saved lives by concealing cities, cost lives through traffic accidents. The lesson: demand evidence. Measure what actually improves survival, not what feels safe. The validated techniques share common elements: layered defense, blackout plus shelters plus firefighting equipment, community coordination, warden networks, block leaders, fire watch rotations, dual-use infrastructure, Morrison tables, Anderson shelter vegetables, victory gardens. These principles apply to contemporary threats. Power grid failures require light discipline, community coordination for sharing resources. Natural disasters need pre-positioned supplies, neighborhood communication networks. Civil unrest demands low-visibility security measures, coordinated watch systems, self-sufficiency in critical supplies. The World War II civilian defense system worked because it addressed multiple failure modes simultaneously. No single measure was sufficient. The combination created resilience. Build layered systems that address multiple scenarios. Create neighborhood networks that provide force multiplication. Develop local capacity for immediate response. The techniques from 1940 still work in 2025 because the underlying problems haven't changed. How do you protect vulnerable people when infrastructure fails? How do you coordinate response when communication breaks down? How do you maintain morale during sustained threat? Britain answered those questions under German bombs. The answers: localized knowledge, distributed responsibility, dual-use infrastructure, evidence-based adaptation remain valid. London, May 10, 1945. Big Ben's lights came on for the first time in 5 years and 123 days. People stood in the streets and wept. Not because the war was over, it had been over for days. They wept because they could see the clock again, because windows could be uncovered, because children who'd grown up in darkness could finally see their city lit at night. 12 million Americans served as civilian defense volunteers by war's end. Most never faced the threat Britain endured. American cities weren't bombed. The shelters went unused. The firefighting equipment gathered dust. All that preparation proved unnecessary. But the grandmother who learned to can vegetables from her victory garden taught her daughter. Who taught her daughter? 3 generations later, those skills came back during the pandemic when grocery stores emptied and supply chains fractured. The muscle memory was still there. The man who served as a block warden in 1942, checking on elderly neighbors during blackout drills, taught his son about community responsibility. That son organized his neighborhood's response during Hurricane Katrina. The model was still there. The woman who assembled a Morrison shelter with her bare hands in 1941 understood something her great-granddaughter, installing a safe room in 2025, is just now learning. Protection is something you build before you need it. The principle was still there. World War II ended. The wardens hung up their helmets. The victory gardens were paved over. The shelters were converted to storage sheds or torn down for scrap. But the knowledge didn't die. It went dormant, waiting. Every generation learns the same lesson. When the infrastructure fails, when help doesn't come, when you're alone in the dark listening for the sound of danger, that's when you understand why your grandfather dug a hole in his garden, why your grandmother kept sand buckets by the door, why your neighbor knows everyone on the block by name. The tactics are forgotten, but they're not gone. They're in the muscle memory of a civilization that survived because ordinary people learned how to protect each other when everything else failed. And they'll be there, waiting, the next time we need them.